Welcome to The Awaited, our show that's dedicated to coming to reflect upon the Imam of our time, alayhi salam, and our role in relation to him during the period of occultation. I'm Rebecca Masterton, my guest is Sheikh Mohammed Zakaria, and we're here to think about education during the period of occultation. What is the role of the teacher? What is the role of the student? And inshallah we're going to be looking at this in more detail so that we don't just follow our education blindly, so that we become more aware of what, from the perspective of the Imam, is expected of us. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
You have written a lot on education and educational methods as well. And just before we start on that, there was something that I just wanted to highlight, the link between Imam Ali alayhi salam and the Qa'im alayhi salam in relation to knowledge, where it is narrated, it says here in the tradition of Kumail, Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam said, "O Kumail, there is no knowledge but that I am its initiator, and there is nothing but that the Qa'im will take it to its end." So what Imam Ali alayhi salam has left behind, you know, from the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Ahlulbayt, it's an ongoing line that is going to be sort of manifested or completed by the Qa'im. So we are part of that, I suppose, stream. We're in that stream. I guess I wanted to ask first, in terms of the Imam alayhi salam, how should we be educating ourselves? And how should we be contributing to something, to the world in which we live, especially during this period of occultation?
You're right, we should be contributing to the world we live in, and we can only, I think, successfully do that if we're talking about education by being very discerning, by choosing not only the subjects which we're going to study very carefully, but also choosing the institutes which we go to pursue that knowledge. The benefit and aiding society doesn't only come from studying classical Islamic sciences, okay, the ulum, but it's much more wider than that. So studying medicine, becoming a doctor, becoming a dentist, becoming a pharmacist, being involved in economics, being a nurse, etc. All of this contributes to society, to the betterment of society, we should say, depending upon the orientation of the particular individual. So when we're looking at Islam, we're not looking at something which is rooted in the personal. We're talking about a social reality. Yeah. And it being a social reality asks us to contribute in a positive manner to the society which we find ourselves in. So anything that brings wholesome change to a society which we find ourselves in, we could say helps to pave the way for the return of the Imam alayhi salam.
Inshallah. First of all, I know it's a very broad question, but what do you feel at the moment? Because I know you've worked a lot for change, for things to be improved, in teaching methods, in the role of the teacher, in the student, in thinking about why we are, trying to gain knowledge, trying to gain an education. What do you feel are the main challenges that Muslims of today, the followers of Ahlulbayt alayhim salam, are facing with coming to, being able to, let's say, fulfill their potential in contributing something?
It's multifaceted. I think we have to understand that there is, let's say, a circle. You have the institute, which is, let's say, offering knowledge. You have the student who is seeking knowledge. You have the society within which the teaching and the learning takes place. You have the community also, which hopefully is going to benefit from the knowledge which has been gained by the particular individual. And here I'm talking about a community-based education, not an education based upon, well, I've taken the student loan.
Yeah.
It's all about me and not feeding back to the community which I come from. So when we look at the institutes or the institutions of learning, we have to ask ourselves upon which ethos have they been established? Have they been established just to offer programs of study and by doing so get some financial remuneration? If that's the ethos, then I don't think anything productive is going to be passed from the teacher to the student apart from book knowledge.
Yeah.
But if we're talking about institutions which see themselves as part and parcel of the society within which they exist, and their ethos is to bring about change, productive change, not only within the immediate Muslim community, but within the wider community within which they exist, then we can start talking about productive change taking place within the teaching and learning cycle. That the teachers are coming from a particular orientation, and that is one of enriching not only themselves, but the learners they have been tasked with educating, not teaching, educating. Because when we use the term education, we mean to draw out the potentialities, the potentials, the latent potentials of that individual. So, and engaging with the learner at a particular level that is removing all the superficial barriers which may have cropped up, may exist, and engaging with the individual relating to their own personal biography. So it's tailoring the education to suit the needs of the individual. That needs to take place within the institution. From an individual learner's perspective, the individual learner has to be critical, not only of themselves, but also of the teaching and learning cycle. They are not an automaton to simply sit there and be programmed. No, they must engage with the knowledge being presented on a critical level, and if they find that that knowledge is not something which benefits them as a person and in turn benefits the community which they come from, then they need to question it, reject it. So it's not about accepting blindly that which is portrayed as knowledge. It's about acting in a critical manner with regards to the knowledge which is being presented.
I think this is one thing that I've noticed as well, in that being within, let's say, the Muslim community, whatever that is. Some people argue there isn't a community; it's just very disparate.
Sure.
But anyway, large group of people who are aware of each other's existence, at least, who kind of know each other in some way or other. Very much the kind of the way of, as you say, educating younger, educating people, educating students. It is this kind of process. It's almost like they just go, both the student and the teacher go through this process, and then the student leaves, and then that's it. And sometimes you wonder, have you had any beneficial effect in that student's life? Did I really know that student as a person? Have I given my best? Has their heart been awakened? Or has it just been both of you sort of blindly going through the thing? They come out of the system and go on to do their thing. I have noticed over the years that, for example, still being in touch with, say, students who I knew 10 years ago, that is a nice thing when you can see people growing up. And that's when I start to feel that there is some kind of community, or the potential for one, where the teacher, your role is not confined to the classroom or the college, but you're someone who watches, your student after they've left the college. But I don't know how possible that is, given the pressures that are sort of out there.
I would then divide the educative process into two then. Simply put, the true educative process and the false educative process. The false educative process is the banking education system where the student comes through the door, there's initial assessment carried out, they go into the classroom, information is thrown at them, they're able to cope with it or they're not able to cope with it. Formative assessments are done, summative assessments are done, and then they're out the door.
Yeah.
And the next one comes in. It's a churning out process. I call that the false educative process. Right. The true educative process, I believe, is the one which you're speaking of. However, given the demands of the modern curriculum, which doesn't ask for us to engage with the souls of our students, yes, to engage with their academic, their emotional and their spiritual intelligences, then it leaves individuals who are that way inclined to try and make up for what the student is actually missing out in the teaching and the learning process. So finding solidarity with students outside of the classroom is crucial. Yeah? Mature students, knowing their personal biographies, knowing what's going on in their lives, allows us to break down barriers, allows access to knowledge to be had in so many different ways that maybe the formality of a classroom stifles the ability of a particular learner to grasp that knowledge. But then when we make connections with students outside of the classroom, and we open up the learning process not only to the formal setting, but the informal setting, then in my opinion, this allows for students to grasp knowledge in a completely different way. And they see that learning is not only within the formal setting, it also takes place within the informal setting as well. And having a teacher wanting to engage with you in that particular manner is very enriching. Yeah. Yeah. Wanting to know, what's gone on in your life today. And knowing what's gone on in the life of the student allows us to...
I think this is one strong criticism I have of my own, education, state education, was that it is very much about... Now, some people might argue, but that's a good thing. It's all about sort of just being prepared for getting a job.
Sure. And
some people, I know there have people that would argue, well, that's a nice thing. I wish my school had done that. But the human being is more than just a job. I think what we're finding now, I mean, some of the challenges in this day and age, especially is as we are, most of us would say we are in Akhir Zaman, the last era of decline, and we know sort of the atmosphere of this era has been described by the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, and his family, that we are facing this type of education, which is we can see is even affecting Islamic education, where the student is just processed through. And then on top of that, we've got this kind of general dumbing down of education or of knowledge, where again, I feel that the standards that are okay, acceptable, are getting lower and lower, and and this is having a very detrimental effect, I think, on young Muslims, where they're in a system, or they've gone through the state system, where their teachers have had very low expectations of them, don't really care if, what they're doing. And then they might go into Islamic education, and they've had this kind of, I would say they've even been damaged by this system, where they haven't been pushed to kind of perfect themselves. Sure. And by the time they come into Islamic education, it's very difficult to engage with a student who has become cynical, we could say, as well. I mean, getting through that, how do we engage with that kind of cynicism and you know, the hardening of the heart, the closing of the heart. I think this is one of the
challenges.
Yeah.
Sincerity. A learner who has gone through the very abrasive secular education that is available, particularly in this country, and they enter into the Islamic learning environment, they must enter into an environment which is predicated on healing.
Right.
And that the teacher must be sincere. Now, when we use the term teacher, what we're talking about is an individual who has a set of competencies which are not only related to the academic ability of the learner. This range of competencies relate to the spiritual and the emotional competencies of the learner. Engaging with a learner on those levels allows the learner to see, hopefully, that this individual is engaging me in a completely different manner. It's holistic. They want to know who I am, what makes me tick.
Yeah.
And by knowing what makes me tick, then the teacher within the classical Islamic system is able to administer the medicine. Knowledge is medicine.
Yeah.
Knowledge is healing. Via this knowledge, the individual is then able to perform certain roles within the society with which they come from. Okay? Within the secular system, it's all about confining, narrowing, and pigeonholing.
Yeah.
But sometimes we do find that the secular system does provide the Muslim student with a very firm base. And it's when they come to the supposed Islamic educative environment that they find a narrowing, a stifling, an unwillingness to engage them as a human being.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, this is, and inshallah we're going to be discussing, you know, particularly the role of the teacher. But in order to heal, we could say, or, you know, engage with the student as a person, that teacher has got to have, you know, mastered their own selves, not be motivated by their own ego, or you know, be experts in you know, engaging with a human being, managing human beings.
Or not necessarily they've mastered themselves, because the teacher is a work in process.
Right.
So that this idea of a reflective paradigm is at the core of their teaching and learning. And they understand that they're never the finished or the complete article, and they're always aspiring to something higher. That's the minimum.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that would mean, again, quite a shift in thinking for a lot of teachers, because we know as well that many teachers feel that they have to be in a position of you know, dictating to the student, being the one who knows, and some teachers even feel kind of uncomfortable with students sort of challenging them. But if they changed that way, that idea about themselves, that they're meant to reflect on what they have learned as well, that would very much change the dynamic between.
Yes. And when we look at where the teacher has been educated and then after that presenting themselves within the learning environment, we see that some teacher training programs do not require the teacher to reflect on their practice.
Right.
And if they do, they ask them to reflect upon their professional pedagogical practice, not to reflect upon their spiritual, emotional practice. Because if a teacher is asked to do that, and that becomes a facet of a teacher's professional practice, it will find itself within the learning and the teaching environment. It will issue from the teacher naturally. So we have to question, what is a teacher within the Islamic understanding of the teacher, and what is learning, what is teaching, and also who is the learner? Because Islam does have its unique view on what a teacher actually is.
And inshallah, after the break, we'll be finding out what that is. You're watching The Awaited. We're going to go to break. Inshallah, we'll see you afterwards. Line that is going to be sort of manifested or completed by the Qa'im. So we are part of that, I suppose, stream. We're in that stream. I guess I wanted to ask first, in terms of the Imam alayhi salam, how should we be educating ourselves, and how should we be contributing to something, to the world in which we live, especially during this period of occultation?
You're right, we should be contributing to the world we live in, and we can only, I think, successfully do that if we're talking about education by being very careful.
You have written a lot on education and educational methods as well, and just before we start on that, there was something that I just wanted to highlight, the link between Imam Ali alayhi salam and the Qa'im alayhi salam in relation to knowledge, where it is narrated, it says here in the tradition of Kumail, Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam said, "O Kumail, there is no knowledge but that I am its initiator, and there is nothing but that the Qa'im will take it to its end." So what Imam Ali alayhi salam has left behind, you know, from the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Ahlulbayt, it's an ongoing
discerning by choosing not only the subjects which we're going to study very carefully, but also choosing the institutes which we go to pursue that knowledge. The benefit and aiding society doesn't only come from studying classical Islamic sciences, okay, the ulum, but it's much more wider than that. So studying medicine, becoming a doctor, becoming a dentist, becoming a pharmacist, being involved in economics, being a nurse, etc. All of this contributes to society, to the betterment of society. We should.
And welcome to The Awaited, our show that's dedicated to coming to reflect upon the Imam of our time, alayhi salam, and our role in relation to him during the period of occultation. I'm Rebecca Masterton, my guest is Sheikh Mohammed Zakaria, and we're here to think about education during the period of occultation. What is the role of the teacher? What is the role of the student? And inshallah, we're going to be looking at this in more detail so that we don't just follow our education blindly, so that we become more aware of what, from the perspective of the Imam, is expected of us. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah.